In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Coalition, where alien royalty commanded fleets that could shatter planets and diplomatic immunity meant the difference between life and extinction, no one expected a human maintenance worker to change the course of galactic history. Marcus Chen was just trying to fix a gravity generator when the assassin's plasma bolt meant for Princess Zarateth came screaming toward her delicate crystalline form. What happened next would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about human reflexes, human loyalty, and the terrifying bond that forms when someone willingly dies for a stranger. But Marcus didn't die. And now, as he lay in the Queen's private medical bay surrounded by technology that could rebuild him from atoms up, he was about to discover that saving the life of Zarathi royalty came with consequences no human had ever faced before. The Queen of the most powerful military force in 3 galaxies had just declared him her personal property. The galaxy was about to learn why you never, ever mess with something a human has chosen to protect. The gravity generator hummed with a sick, warbling note that made Marcus Chen's teeth ache. He pressed his ear against the massive cylindrical housing, listening to the discordant symphony of failing components deep within the machine that kept the Zarathi diplomatic station from becoming a tumbling death trap in the void. "Definitely the tertiary stabilizer array," he muttered, pulling up the diagnostic readout on his handheld scanner. The device, crude by galactic standards but reliable as sunrise, showed exactly what his experienced ears had already told him. 3 months working maintenance on this floating palace had taught him to read the station's mechanical moods better than most of the aliens who called it home. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his work glove. The Zarathi kept their environments hot and humid, perfect for their crystalline physiology, but hell on human comfort. His maintenance uniform stuck to his back like a second skin, and the recycled air tasted of ozone and something vaguely floral that the station's atmospheric processors added to accommodate the dozen different species that worked here. The diplomatic station was a marvel of engineering, a kilometers-long structure that served as neutral ground for negotiations between the various powers of the Andromeda Coalition. Its hull gleamed with the characteristic blue-white sheen of Zarathi construction materials, while its interior blended architectural styles from across 3 galaxies. Here, in the maintenance section, deep in the station's bowels, function trumped form. Pipes, conduits, and machinery created a maze that only humans seemed capable of navigating efficiently. "That's why they hired us," Marcus said to himself, a habit he'd developed during the long, solitary hours of his work. Humans, it turned out, were exceptionally good at crawling through tight spaces and fixing things that other species found impossible to reach. Their compact size, combined with an almost supernatural ability to understand mechanical systems, made them invaluable as maintenance workers throughout Coalition space. Not that it paid particularly well. Marcus was here because he needed the credits to get his sister through university back on Earth. The work was honest, if lonely, and it kept him fed while slowly building toward a future he could barely imagine. Dreams of opening his own repair shop seemed impossibly distant when measured against the vast scale of galactic civilization. The gravity generator shuddered, and Marcus felt his stomach lurch as the station's artificial gravity fluctuated. He needed to get this fixed before someone important noticed. The Zarathi didn't tolerate inefficiency, especially not when it came from their human contractors. He'd seen good workers get shipped home with black marks on their records for less. Marcus grabbed his toolkit and began the delicate process of accessing the generator's inner workings. The Zarathi had built their machines to last millennia, which was admirable in theory but made repairs a nightmare in practice. Every component was sealed behind multiple layers of crystalline plating that required specific tools and techniques to open without damaging the delicate mechanisms inside. As he worked, his mind wandered to the message he'd received from home that morning. His sister Emma had made the dean's list again, her studies in xenobiology progressing better than anyone had expected. She had a gift for understanding alien life forms that Marcus envied. Where he saw incomprehensible creatures with bizarre customs, she saw fascinating evolutionary adaptations and rich cultural traditions worth preserving. "If she could see me now," he chuckled, carefully extracting a burnt-out stabilizer crystal the size of his thumb. The component was beautiful in its way, its fractured surface catching the maintenance bay's harsh lighting and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. Zerathi technology was as much art as engineering. Every piece crafted with an aesthetic sensibility that spoke to their species' deep appreciation for visual harmony. A soft chime echoed through the maintenance bay, followed by the distinctive harmonic tones of a Zerathi voice speaking over the station's communication system. Marcus didn't understand the language, but he'd learned to recognize the cadence and rhythm that indicated routine announcements. Probably just another diplomatic function in the upper levels, the kind of high-level negotiation that kept the coalition from tearing itself apart over territorial disputes and trade disagreements. Marcus had never seen any of the diplomats who gave meaning to this floating palace. His work kept him in the lower sections, far from the elegant chambers where representatives of dozens of species gathered to debate the future of galactic civilization. Sometimes he wondered what it would be like to walk those corridors, to see the beings whose decisions affected billions of lives across the galaxy. But humans weren't invited to those spaces. They were tools, useful for specific purposes but not considered worthy of participating in the great game of interstellar politics. The replacement crystal slid into place with a satisfying click, and the gravity generator's discordant hum immediately smoothed into a steady harmonic drone. Marcus allowed himself a moment of professional satisfaction. Another crisis averted. Another day's work earning him the credits he needed to keep Emma in school and himself fed. He was closing up the access panel when the explosion hit. The blast wave traveled through the station's superstructure like thunder through a canyon, a deep, bone-shaking rumble that made every piece of equipment in the maintenance bay rattle against its moorings. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red, and the station's communication system erupted in a chaos of voices speaking a dozen different languages. Marcus grabbed onto the gravity generator's housing as the station shuddered around him. His first thought was mechanical failure, some catastrophic breakdown in one of the major systems. But the quality of the blast, the way it had felt sharp and sudden rather than the gradual catastrophic failure he'd expect from machinery, suggested something else entirely. That was an explosion, he said aloud, his voice barely audible over the wailing of alarm systems. Someone just set off a bomb. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was an attack. Marcus had trained for emergency scenarios as part of his maintenance certification, but those simulations had always seemed abstract, academic exercises that bore little resemblance to the reality of working in deep space. Now, as the station's hull groaned around him and emergency systems struggled to maintain atmospheric integrity, those lessons came flooding back with crystal clarity. First priority, secure the area and assess damage. Second priority, assist in evacuation if ordered. Third priority, maintain critical systems to prevent total station failure. Marcus grabbed his scanner and began a rapid assessment of the gravity generator and its surrounding systems. The explosion had been distant, probably several levels up, but the shockwave had traveled through the station's structure and potentially damaged delicate components throughout the facility. If the gravity generators failed completely, everyone on the station would find themselves floating helplessly while the structure tore itself apart. The scanner showed green across the board. Whatever had happened, it hadn't directly affected the station's primary gravity systems. Marcus allowed himself a moment of relief before the broader implications hit him. If someone was willing to attack a diplomatic station, they weren't interested in negotiation or compromise. They wanted to send a message written in blood and twisted metal. Marcus made his way toward the maintenance bay's exit, intending to check on other critical systems throughout his assigned section. The corridor beyond was chaos, filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burned electronics. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and the sound of running feet echoed from multiple directions as station personnel responded to the crisis. A figure emerged from the smoke ahead of him, moving with the fluid grace that marked them as Zerathi. The being was tall and elegant, their crystalline skin refracting the emergency lighting into prismatic patterns that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. But there was something wrong with their posture, something predatory in the way they moved that set every alarm bell in Marcus's head ringing. The Zerathi carried something in their hand, a device that hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus didn't recognize the specific technology, but he'd worked around enough dangerous equipment to know a weapon when he saw one. This wasn't a station employee responding to an emergency, this was the enemy. Marcus pressed himself against the corridor wall, hoping the smoke and poor lighting would conceal him. His heart hammered against his ribs as he watched the figure move past his position, clearly heading for something specific rather than randomly searching for targets. The assassin, because that's what this had to be, knew exactly where they were going. The realization struck Marcus like a physical blow. The explosion hadn't been the attack, it had been a distraction. Marcus followed at a distance, his maintenance training serving him well as he moved quietly through corridors he knew better than most of the station's official personnel. The assassin was heading toward the upper levels, toward the diplomatic quarters where the real business of the station took place, toward the areas where humans were never allowed to go. The service corridors that honeycombed the station's interior gave Marcus routes that the assassin wouldn't know about. Paths designed for maintenance access that ran parallel to the main thoroughfares. He climbed steadily through the station's levels, guided by instinct and growing certainty that something terrible was about to happen. Marcus emerged from a service hatch into an elegant corridor that belonged to a different world than the utilitarian spaces where he normally worked. The walls were smooth curves of Zarathi crystal composite, embedded with flowing patterns of light that pulsed gently in rhythm with the station's systems. Art from a dozen worlds lined the walls, diplomatic gifts that spoke to the vast cultural wealth of the Coalition. Under normal circumstances, Marcus would have been thrown out of this area before he could take 3 steps, but circumstances were far from normal. The corridor ahead opened into a vast chamber that served as one of the station's primary diplomatic meeting spaces. Through the archway, Marcus could see the elegant curves of Zarathi architecture combined with environmental modifications designed to accommodate species from across the galaxy. The chamber was beautiful, a monument to the possibility of cooperation between radically different forms of life. And there, in the center of that monument to peace, stood Princess Zariath. Marcus had never seen Zarathi royalty before, but there was no mistaking the being who commanded the center of the chamber. Princess Zariath was tall even by Zarathi standards, her crystalline form catching and reflecting the chamber's ambient lighting in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. Her skin showed the characteristic blue-white coloration of the royal bloodline, and the ceremonial robes she wore were woven with materials that seemed to glow with their own inner light. She was beautiful in an alien way that Marcus's human brain struggled to process. The Zarathi had evolved from silicon-based life forms, and their aesthetic sense reflected geometries and proportions that human eyes found simultaneously attractive and unsettling. Looking at Princess Zarawath was like looking at a living work of art, something too perfect to exist in the same universe as maintenance bays and broken gravity generators. The assassin emerged from the shadows at the chamber's far end, moving with deadly purpose toward the princess, their weapon charged up with a high-pitched whine that cut through the chamber's ambient sounds like a blade. Whatever that device was, it was designed to kill, and Princess Zariath stood directly in its path. Marcus didn't think. There wasn't time for thought, for consideration of consequences or rational analysis of his chances. There was only the sight of murder about to happen and the growing certainty that he was the only person in position to stop it. He ran. The distance across the chamber seemed to stretch forever, each step feeling like it took an eternity while the assassin's weapon reached full charge. Marcus could see the killer's finger tightening on the trigger, could see Princess Zarawath beginning to turn toward the threat with the slow, graceful movements of her species. She would never be fast enough to escape. No Zarathi could move quickly enough to avoid that blast, but humans could. Marcus slammed into Princess Zarawath with all the force his running leap could generate, his arms wrapping around her crystalline form as he drove them both toward the floor. The assassin's weapon discharged with a sound like reality tearing, and Marcus felt something that burned worse than fire tear through his chest and shoulder. They hit the ground hard, Marcus's body cushioning the princess's fall even as agony exploded through his nervous system. The plasma bolt had caught him across the upper torso and he could smell his own flesh burning. But Princess Zariath was alive. her alien eyes wide with shock as she stared up at the human who had just taken a killing blow meant for her. The chamber erupted in chaos as station security forces finally arrived, their weapons filling the air with return fire that caught the assassin before they could escape. Marcus didn't see the end of the fight. His vision was going dark around the edges, and the pain in his chest was fading into a strange, cold numbness that he recognized as a very bad sign. Princess Sarioth was saying something to him, her harmonic voice speaking words in a language he didn't understand. But the tone was unmistakable, filled with gratitude and something else that sounded almost like wonder. Her hands, delicate constructs of living crystal, touched his face with surprising gentleness as his consciousness began to slip away. The last thing Marcus saw before the darkness took him was the princess speaking rapidly into a communication device, her voice carrying an urgency that transcended language barriers. She was calling for help, calling for the best medical care the station could provide, calling for someone to save the human who had saved her life. Marcus Chen had spent his entire adult life fixing things that other people had broken. As consciousness faded, he wondered if this was finally something that couldn't be repaired. Marcus awakened to the sound of crystalline harmonics, a complex melody that seemed to resonate through his bones and make his teeth ache in the most pleasant way imaginable. The music was unlike anything he'd ever heard, simultaneously alien and deeply familiar, as if his genetic memory recognized something fundamental in those mathematical progressions. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted the decision. Pain lanced through his chest and shoulder, but it was different from what he remembered. Instead of the searing agony of plasma burns, this felt more like deep muscle soreness, the kind of ache that came from intensive physical therapy or healing tissue working to knit itself back together. "Do not attempt to move yet, Marcus Chen." The voice speaking perfect, unaccented English made him freeze. It was unmistakably Zerathi, carrying all the harmonic overtones and crystalline clarity of that species' vocal apparatus, but the words themselves were in his native language. Marcus opened his eyes fully and found himself staring at a ceiling that definitely wasn't standard station architecture. The room around him was a study in organic curves and flowing lines, every surface crafted from the characteristic blue-white material that marked Zerathi construction at its finest. But this wasn't just any Zerathi architecture. This was royal architecture, the kind of space that existed only in the private chambers of the Coalition's most powerful beings. The walls seemed to glow with their own inner light, and the air itself shimmered with barely visible energy patterns that spoke of technologies far beyond human understanding. "Where am I?" Marcus asked, his voice coming out as a dry rasp that barely qualified as speech. His throat felt like he'd been gargling broken glass, and even forming words sent spikes of discomfort through his jaw and neck. "You are in my personal medical facility," the voice replied, and its owner stepped into Marcus's field of view. "You are safe, and you are healing, though the process has been more complex than initially anticipated." Marcus stared, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. The being standing beside his bed was clearly Zerathi, but unlike any member of that species he'd encountered during his months on the station. This individual was taller than even Princess Zerathith, their crystalline form showing veins of deep purple and gold that seemed to pulse with inner energy. The robes they wore were works of art in themselves, woven from materials that shifted color and pattern as they moved. But it was the crown that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The delicate construction of living crystal that adorned the being's head could belong to only one individual in all of Coalition space. He was looking at Queen Veltoreth herself, the absolute ruler of the Zerathi Empire and one of the most powerful beings in 3 galaxies. "Your Majesty," Marcus whispered, trying again to sit up despite the protest from his healing body. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. You should remain still and allow your body to complete its healing process," Queen Veltoreth interrupted, her tone carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You have been unconscious for 6 standard days while my medical staff work to repair the damage inflicted by the assassin's weapon." 6 days. Marcus felt his mind reel at the implications. He'd been unconscious for 6 days, which meant his absence from work had definitely been noticed. His employment contract probably had clauses about extended unauthorized leave, and the penalties for breach of contract in Coalition space were severe. He could be looking at deportation back to Earth with a black mark that would make finding future work impossible. "My job," Marcus said, panic creeping into his voice. "I need to get back to work. The gravity generators in Section 7 need regular maintenance, and if I don't check the atmospheric processors..." "Your employment with the Station Maintenance Division has been terminated," the Queen said, and Marcus felt his heart sink toward his boots. "However, this is not the disaster you appear to believe it to be. Your previous position has become irrelevant in light of recent developments." Marcus stared at her, trying to parse the implications of that statement. His job was gone, which meant his income was gone, which meant his sister's education was in jeopardy, which meant everything he'd worked for over the past 2 years had just evaporated. But the Queen's tone suggested this was somehow good news, which made no sense at all. "I don't understand," Marcus said finally. "What recent developments?" Queen Velterith moved closer to his bed, her presence somehow making the air itself feel denser and more charged with possibility. "The recent development in which a human maintenance worker saved the life of my daughter, Princess Zareth, by placing himself between her and an assassin's weapon. The recent development in which that same human demonstrated reflexes and decision-making capabilities that exceeded what my species believed possible for your kind. The explosion, the chase through service corridors, the elegant diplomatic chamber where Princess Zareth had stood unaware of the death approaching from the shadows. The assassin's weapon charging up, the desperate sprint across the chamber, the moment of impact when plasma energy meant to kill royalty had torn through his own flesh instead." "Is she all right?" Marcus asked, genuine concern overriding his confusion about his own situation. "The princess, I mean. Was she hurt?" Something shifted in Queen Veltarith's expression. A subtle change in the way she held herself that Marcus's human instincts interpreted as surprise mixed with something that might have been approval. "Princess Zareth is entirely unharmed thanks to your intervention. The assassin's weapon would have killed her instantly had the bolt struck its intended target. Instead, it struck you, and you survived injuries that should have been fatal." Marcus touched his chest gingerly, feeling unfamiliar textures beneath the strange, gossamer-thin material that served as a medical gown. His skin felt different, somehow more resilient, and there was an odd tingling sensation that suggested cellular activity far beyond normal human healing rates. "How badly was I hurt?" he asked. "I remember the pain, and then everything went dark." "The plasma bolt destroyed approximately 30% of your chest and shoulder, including portions of your heart and left lung," the Queen said with clinical precision that made Marcus's stomach lurch. "Such injuries would result in death within minutes, even with the most advanced medical intervention available." Marcus stared at her, his mind struggling to process that information. 30% of his chest destroyed. Heart damage. Lung damage. Those weren't injuries anyone survived, human or alien. Yet here he was, conscious and talking, with nothing more than deep muscle soreness to show for what should have been a fatal encounter. "But these were not normal circumstances," the Queen continued. "My daughter's life had been saved by your sacrifice, which created certain obligations under Zarethi law that superseded normal medical protocols. I authorized the use of our most advanced regenerative technologies to repair the damage to your body." "Regenerative technologies?" Marcus repeated, a chill running down his spine. He'd heard rumors about Zarethi medical capabilities, whispered stories among the station's human workers about miraculous healings and impossible recoveries, but those had been rumors, the kind of wild speculation that grew in the absence of real information. "Your species possesses remarkable genetic plasticity," the Queen explained, settling into a chair that seemed to grow from the floor as she approached it. "When exposed to the proper catalysts and growth factors, human cellular regeneration can be enhanced far beyond its normal parameters. My medical staff has essentially rebuilt the damaged portions of your body using your own genetic template as a blueprint." Marcus raised a shaking hand to his chest, feeling the unfamiliar contours of newly grown tissue beneath the medical gown. The implications of what the Queen was describing were staggering. They hadn't just healed him. They had literally rebuilt him, using Xerathi biotechnology to enhance his body's natural healing processes beyond anything his species had ever achieved. Why? Marcus asked, the question emerging as barely more than a whisper. Why would you do that for a human maintenance worker? Queen Veltareth regarded him with eyes that seemed to glow with inner fire. Because you saved my daughter's life without thought for your own safety, without consideration of reward or recognition. Because you demonstrated loyalty and courage that exceeded what my species believed possible from yours. And because, under the ancient laws of my people, such an act creates a debt that can only be repaid through the highest honors my empire can bestow. The room seemed to spin around Marcus as the full implications of that statement sank in. Ancient laws, highest honors, a debt to Xerathi royalty that could apparently only be repaid through means that required rebuilding his body with alien technology. None of this sounded like something that would end well for a simple maintenance worker from Earth. What kind of debt? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The debt of life preservation between a member of the royal bloodline and an alien subject, the Queen replied. It is an obligation that has not been invoked for over 3 centuries, not since the Andromedan Wars when coalition forces first encountered my people. The last case involved a vegan diplomat who saved the life of my predecessor, Queen Mortaleth. Marcus waited for her to continue, but the Queen seemed to be studying his reaction with the intensity of a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. The silence stretched between them until it became unbearable. What happened to the vegan diplomat? Marcus finally asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. She became my predecessor's personal advisor and confidant, serving in that capacity for the remainder of her natural lifespan, the Queen said. She was granted estates, titles, and privileges typically reserved for members of the royal family. When she died, her funeral was attended by representatives from every major power in the coalition, and her descendants still hold positions of honor within our government. That didn't sound terrible, Marcus thought, though there was something in the Queen's tone that suggested the situation was more complicated than she was letting on. Personal advisor to Xerathi royalty sounded like a significant step up from maintenance work, and the idea of his descendants holding positions of honor was almost incomprehensible to someone who'd grown up in the overcrowded slums of Earth's industrial sectors. But the debt bond between our species creates certain complications that did not exist in the case of the vegan diplomat, the Queen continued, and Marcus felt his momentary optimism begin to evaporate. Humans and Xerathi have what your scientists would term biological compatibility, in ways that most other species combinations do not. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. Biological compatibility? Your enhanced cellular regeneration has created metabolic and neurological changes that make separation from Xerathi bioenergy fields potentially fatal, the Queen explained with the same clinical precision she'd used to describe his injuries. Simply put, the process that saved your life has also made you dependent on proximity to members of my species for your continued survival. The room spun around Marcus as the full horror of his situation became clear. They had saved his life, but at the cost of his freedom. He was alive, healthy, and stronger than he'd ever been, but he was also permanently bound to the very aliens who had healed him. He couldn't leave, couldn't return to his old life, couldn't go home to Earth or continue working toward his dreams of independence. How close is proximity? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own heartbeat. The effects begin to manifest after approximately 72 hours of separation, the Queen said. Complete cellular breakdown occurs within 10 to 14 days, depending on the individual's constitution and the extent of the biological modifications. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what had been done to him. He had perhaps 2 weeks of independence before his body would begin to shut down without Xerathi bioenergy to sustain the alien modifications that were keeping him alive. He was trapped as surely as if he were behind prison walls. I understand this is difficult to accept, the Queen said, her voice taking on a gentler tone that somehow made everything worse. But you must understand that the alternative was death. My medical staff faced a choice between allowing you to die or saving your life through means that would create this dependency. The choice was mine to make, and I chose to preserve the life of the being who had saved my daughter. Marcus opened his eyes and met her gaze, seeing something in those alien features that might have been genuine regret. She wasn't lying to him or trying to minimize the severity of his situation. She was simply stating facts, explaining the consequences of decisions that had been made while he lay dying on a medical table. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "What does this debt bond actually mean for my life?" "It means that you will remain here in quarters appropriate to your new status as a member of my personal household," the Queen replied. "It means that your previous concerns about employment and financial security are no longer relevant, as you will be provided for according to the standards befitting one who has earned royal favor. And it means that you will serve as my personal advisor on human affairs, helping me understand your species in ways that no previous Zarathi ruler has attempted." Royal household. The term sounded impressive, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was hearing a beautifully worded description of very comfortable captivity. He would have everything he needed except the one thing he wanted most, the freedom to choose his own path through life. "My sister," Marcus said, suddenly panic flaring in his chest. "She's at university on Earth, studying xenobiology. I've been sending her money for her education. If I can't work, if I can't leave here, what happens to her?" Queen Veltureth's expression shifted again, and this time Marcus was certain he saw approval in her alien features. "Your concern for family speaks well of your character, Marcus Chen. Princess Zareth informed me of your personal circumstances, including your sister's academic pursuits. Arrangements have already been made to ensure her education continues without interruption." Relief flooded through Marcus so quickly that he felt lightheaded. Emma would be all right. Whatever else this situation meant for his life, his sister's future was secure. That knowledge was worth almost any sacrifice. "What kind of arrangements?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "The Zarathi Empire maintains educational exchange programs with several universities throughout Coalition space, including the institution your sister attends," the Queen explained. "She has been awarded a full scholarship to complete her xenobiology degree with the option to pursue advanced studies in our own academic institutions if she chooses. She believes this opportunity arose through her own academic merit, and there is no reason to inform her otherwise." Emma's dream of becoming a xenobiologist was not only safe but enhanced beyond anything she could have imagined. The Zarathi were the most advanced biological scientists in the known galaxy, and the chance to study with them was an opportunity that could define her entire career. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what the Queen had just revealed. "Thank you for taking care of her. Family bonds are sacred to my people," the Queen replied. "Honor demands that those who serve the royal house faithfully should see their loved ones protected and provided for. Your sister's success brings honor to your name, which brings honor to my household." Marcus lay back against the pillows that seemed to mold themselves to support his body perfectly, his mind reeling from everything he'd learned. His old life was gone, swept away in the moment he'd chosen to save a princess's life. But the new life being offered in its place was beyond anything he could have imagined. He would never again worry about money or employment. He would have access to knowledge and experiences that no human before him had ever encountered. He would serve as a bridge between two species, helping to forge understanding between humans and the most powerful alien civilization in the galaxy. And he would never be free to leave. "I need time to think about this," Marcus said finally. "Time is a luxury we can afford," the Queen replied, rising from her chair with fluid grace. "Your body requires several more days of healing before you will be fully recovered, and the psychological adjustment to your new circumstances may take considerably longer. When you are ready, Princess Zareth wishes to speak with you personally. She has been concerned about your well-being during your recovery." The Queen moved toward the chamber's exit, but paused before leaving. "Marcus Chen, I want you to understand something that may not be immediately obvious. The debt bond between us is not merely an obligation imposed upon you. It is a sacred trust that binds both parties. Just as you are now dependent upon proximity to my family for your survival, We are bound by honor to ensure your well-being, your happiness, and your fulfillment for as long as you live. She left Marcus alone with his thoughts and the slowly dawning realization that he had become part of something far larger and more complex than he could have imagined. The human maintenance worker who had simply wanted to fix broken things and send his sister to college was gone forever. What remained was something new, something unprecedented in the history of both their species. The question was whether Marcus Chen had the courage to discover what that something might become. Princess Zara Pieth arrived 3 days later, her presence announced by the subtle shift in the chamber's ambient lighting as the walls responded to her royal biosignature. Marcus had spent those days learning to walk again, discovering that his rebuilt body possessed capabilities that his original human form had never known. He was stronger now, faster, his reflexes enhanced to superhuman levels by the Zarathi biotechnology that had saved his life. But strength and speed meant little when faced with the alien princess whose life he had preserved. She entered his recovery chamber with the fluid grace characteristic of her species, but there was something different about her demeanor, a hesitancy that Marcus hadn't expected from Zarathi royalty. "Marcus Chen," she said, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of something that might have been nervousness. "I am pleased to see you recovering well." Marcus attempted to stand as she approached, some instinct telling him that proper respect demanded formal gestures when addressing royalty. But Princess Zaratheth raised a delicate crystalline hand, stopping him before he could complete the motion. "Please remain seated," she said. "Formality seems inappropriate between us, given the circumstances of our meeting." She settled into the chair that had previously accommodated her mother, her movements causing the chamber's light patterns to shift into warmer, more welcoming configurations. Marcus found himself studying her alien features, trying to understand the expressions that played across her crystalline face. The Zarathi didn't emote the way humans did, but their bioluminescent skin patterns and the subtle harmonics in their voices conveyed emotional information to those who knew how to interpret the signs. "Your Highness," Marcus began, but she interrupted him with a gesture that seemed almost human in its familiarity. "Zaratheth," she corrected. "After what has passed between us, I believe we can dispense with excessive formality." "You saved my life, Marcus Chen. Traditional protocols seem inadequate to address such circumstances." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely comfortable with the informality she was requesting. Everything about this situation was far outside his experience or understanding. Human maintenance workers didn't typically develop casual relationships with alien royalty, and he had no social framework for navigating these interactions. "I wanted to thank you," Zarath continued, her voice taking on deeper harmonic qualities that Marcus was beginning to recognize as markers of sincere emotion. "What you did in the diplomatic chamber was beyond courage. It was sacrifice of the highest order, the willingness to give your life for someone you had never met, someone whose very existence you were not supposed to know about." "I couldn't just watch someone get murdered," Marcus replied, the words feeling inadequate to describe the instinctive compulsion that had driven him across that chamber. "It didn't matter who you were or what species you belonged to. No one deserves to die like that." Something in Zarath's expression shifted, her skin patterns brightening in configurations that Marcus interpreted as surprise or perhaps wonder. "My mother mentioned your remarkable ethical consistency. Most beings, when faced with mortal danger, prioritize their own survival above all other considerations. Yet you chose differently." Marcus felt uncomfortable under her scrutiny, as if she were studying him like a particularly interesting scientific specimen. "I don't know about ethical consistency. I just saw someone in danger and reacted. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Zarath said with absolute certainty, "they would not. I have studied the behavioral patterns of dozens of species throughout my education in diplomatic relations. What you did was statistically unprecedented, especially for a human in your socio-economic circumstances." The clinical way she discussed his heroic moment made Marcus wince. He didn't want to be analyzed or studied, didn't want his split-second decision to become the subject of academic interest. He had acted on instinct, nothing more, and the consequences of that instinct were proving more complicated than he could have imagined. "The assassin," Marcus said, changing the subject to something he hoped would be less personally uncomfortable. "Do you know who sent them? Why they wanted you dead?" Zareth's skin patterns dimmed, taking on the darker hues that Marcus was learning indicated displeasure or concern. "The investigation is ongoing, but preliminary evidence suggests the attack was orchestrated by extremist factions within the Andromedan separatist movement. They view the current peace negotiations as a betrayal of their territorial ambitions." Marcus had heard whispers about the separatists during his time on the station, fragments of conversations between maintenance workers who occasionally overheard diplomatic discussions they weren't supposed to understand. The Andromedan colonies wanted independence from coalition authority, and some of their more radical elements apparently believed that murdering negotiators was an acceptable way to achieve their goals. "They targeted you specifically?" Marcus asked. "My role in the peace process has been significant," Zareth replied with what Marcus interpreted as diplomatic understatement. "As heir to the Zarathi throne, my support for the negotiations carries considerable weight with other coalition members. My death would have significantly weakened the pro-peace faction's position." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the full scope of what had almost happened in that diplomatic chamber. The assassination attempt hadn't just been about killing one alien princess, it had been about derailing peace negotiations that could affect billions of lives across multiple galaxies. His instinctive decision to save a stranger had potentially prevented a war. "The separatists must be furious that their plan failed," Marcus said. "Indeed," Zareth agreed, her harmonic voice taking on grimmer overtones, "which is why my mother has insisted on enhanced security measures for both of us. The life bond that now exists between our species makes you a target as well, Marcus Chen. Harming you would cause me considerable distress, which makes you valuable to our enemies as a means of applying psychological pressure." The idea that he had somehow become a chess piece in galactic politics was almost too surreal for Marcus to process. A week ago, his biggest concerns had been maintaining gravity generators and scraping together enough credits to keep his sister in school. Now he was apparently important enough to warrant assassination attempts from interstellar terrorist organizations. "I don't understand this life bond your mother mentioned," Marcus said. She explained the biological dependency, but there seems to be more to it than just medical complications. Zareth was silent for a long moment, her skin pattern cycling through configurations that Marcus couldn't interpret. When she finally spoke, her voice carried harmonic frequencies he hadn't heard before, deeper and more complex than her normal speech patterns. "The life bond is an ancient institution among my people," she began, "originating in the early days of our civilization when survival often depended on the willingness of individuals to sacrifice themselves for the good of the community. When someone preserves the life of a royal family member through personal sacrifice, they become bound to that family by ties that transcend normal social relationships." Marcus waited for her to continue, sensing that she was struggling to find words adequate to explain concepts that had no human equivalent. "In practical terms," Zareth continued, "the life bond means that your well-being becomes as important to my family as our own. Your happiness, your fulfillment, your continued prosperity are now matters of royal concern. But the bond also creates emotional connections that can be intense." "Emotional connections?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. "The individual who preserves royal life becomes precious to the family in ways that extend beyond simple gratitude," Zareth explained, her skin patterns now cycling through configurations that seemed almost hypnotic in their complexity. "Over time, these bonds often develop into relationships that your species might term romantic attachment." Marcus felt his stomach drop toward his boots. "You're saying that saving your life is going to make you fall in love with me?" "Not necessarily," Zareth replied, though her harmonic pattern suggested she was being less than completely truthful. "The life bond creates conditions that make such development likely but not inevitable. Much depends on the individuals involved and their personal compatibility." Marcus rubbed his temples. feeling the beginning of a headache that had nothing to do with his recent medical procedures. The situation was becoming more complicated by the hour, and he was starting to wonder if the assassin's plasma bolt might have been the easier fate. "What happened to the vegan diplomat your mother mentioned?" Marcus asked. "The one who saved your predecessor's life?" Jeremiah's patterns shifted again, taking on configurations that Marcus interpreted as embarrassment or discomfort. Ambassador Velnara became Queen Mortaleth's consort and eventually her co-ruler. Their partnership lasted for over 40 years and was considered one of the most successful diplomatic marriages in coalition history. Diplomatic marriage, Marcus repeated, the term sitting in his mouth like poison. "Is that what's expected to happen between us?" "Nothing is expected," Zareth said quickly, her voice taking on urgent harmonic qualities. "The life bond creates opportunities for deep connection, but it does not compel specific outcomes. You are free to choose your own path within the constraints of your biological dependency." Marcus laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "Free to choose, as long as I never leave your side and eventually marry into the royal family. That's some definition of freedom." "I understand your frustration," Zareth said, her skin patterns dimming with what Marcus interpreted as genuine regret. "The circumstances of our bond were not chosen by either of us. But perhaps we can find ways to make the situation mutually beneficial." "Mutually beneficial," Marcus repeated. "You mean I get to live in luxury as your pet human and you get exotic alien consort to add to your collection?" The chamber's lighting flickered as Zareth's bioluminescence flared with sudden intensity, her harmonic voice taking on overtones that made Marcus's enhanced nervous system sing with uncomfortable resonance. "That is not what I meant, and it is not how I view our situation," she said, her words carrying harmonic frequencies that spoke of genuine anger. "You are not a pet or a trophy, Marcus Chen. You are the being who valued my life above your own safety, who showed courage and selflessness that exceeded anything I believed possible from an alien species. Zareth hadn't asked for this situation any more than he had, and taking his frustration out on her was both unfair and counterproductive." "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is all just overwhelming. A week ago, I was fixing gravity generators and worrying about my sister's tuition payments. Now I'm apparently bound for life to the most powerful royal family in the galaxy, and I don't know how to process any of it." Zara's pattern shifted back toward warmer configurations, her anger apparently forgotten as quickly as it had manifested. "Your confusion is understandable. Perhaps it would help if we approach this situation as partners rather than as bound individuals fulfilling predetermined roles. You possess knowledge and perspective that no member of my species has ever accessed," Zareth explained. "Your understanding of human behavior combined with your unique position as someone who has experienced both human and enhanced physiology makes you invaluable as an advisor on interspecies relations. Meanwhile, I can offer you access to knowledge and experiences that no human has ever enjoyed." Marcus found himself listening with genuine interest for the first time since awakening in the Royal Medical Facility. The idea of partnership implied equality and mutual benefit rather than the comfortable captivity he'd been imagining. "What kind of knowledge and experiences?" he asked. "The Zurithi Empire spans 17 star systems and encompasses scientific achievements that your species is still centuries from discovering," Zarada said, her patterns brightening with what Marcus interpreted as enthusiasm. "We have unlocked the secrets of consciousness transfer, dimensional manipulation, and biological enhancement beyond anything currently available to coalition science." She paused, studying Marcus's reaction before continuing. "But more than that, I can offer you the chance to help shape the future relationship between our species. The peace negotiations that were nearly derailed by my assassination are just the beginning. If successful, they will establish frameworks for cooperation that could benefit both humans and Zarithi for generations to come." Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, an excitement he hadn't experienced since childhood. The maintenance worker in him had always been drawn to fixing things that were broken, and the relationship between humans and aliens seemed like the kind of problem that could benefit from his particular talents. You're talking about more than just personal partnership, Marcus said. You're talking about diplomatic partnership. Exactly, Zara confirmed, her harmonic voice carrying notes of satisfaction. Together, we could pioneer new forms of interspecies cooperation. Your insights into human behavior combined with my understanding of galactic politics could create opportunities that neither of our species has previously imagined. Marcus found himself leaning forward, his enhanced intellect already beginning to see possibilities and connections that his original human brain might have missed. The life bond doesn't just make me dependent on proximity to your family. It makes me a bridge between our species. A bridge, and potentially much more, Zara agreed. The biological enhancements my mother's medical staff performed have given you capabilities that exceed normal human limitations. With proper training and development, you could become something unprecedented in galactic history. What kind of training? Marcus asked, though he suspected he was going to like the answer. Combat training to protect yourself and others in dangerous situations, Zarapith began, counting off possibilities on her crystalline fingers. Diplomatic education to understand the complex political relationships that govern coalition affairs. Scientific instruction to comprehend technologies that could revolutionize human civilization. Linguistic enhancement to communicate effectively with dozens of alien species. Each item on her list sent new waves of excitement through Marcus's enhanced nervous system. The scope of what she was describing went far beyond his wildest dreams of self-improvement. She was offering him the chance to become something that had never existed before, a human with capabilities that could span the gap between species. And in return? Marcus asked, because there had to be a catch to something this extraordinary. In return, you help me understand your species well enough to forge lasting peace between our peoples. Zararith said simply. You serve as my advisor and partner in diplomatic initiatives that could prevent the kind of war the Separatists are trying to start. You use your enhanced capabilities to protect not just my life, but the stability of the entire coalition. Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind reeling from the magnitude of what she was proposing. It wasn't just partnership she was offering. It was purpose on a scale that dwarfed anything he'd ever imagined possible. There's still the matter of the romantic attachment, Marcus said, though the objection felt less important than it had moments earlier. You said the life bond makes that likely. Zaret's patterns shifted into configurations that Marcus was learning to recognize as amusement. I said it makes deep connection likely. Whether that connection takes romantic forms depends on many factors, including mutual attraction and personal compatibility. She paused, her harmonic voice taking on subtle overtones that Marcus found strangely compelling. I will admit that I find your courage and selflessness attractive qualities, but attraction is not the same as compulsion, Marcus Chen. Whatever develops between us will develop naturally or not at all. Marcus found himself studying Zarasiath's alien features with new eyes, trying to understand what attraction might mean between such different species. She was undeniably beautiful in her crystalline perfection, but it was a beauty that his human brain struggled to categorize. Looking at her was like looking at a living work of art, something that inspired awe rather than the more familiar human responses to attractive individuals. But there was something else there, too. Something in the way she spoke and moved that suggested depths of personality and intellect that transcended the barriers between their species. She was brilliant, compassionate, and genuinely concerned for his well-being in ways that had nothing to do with the life bond's obligations. I think I'd like to try this partnership approach, Marcus said finally, with the understanding that we're both learning as we go and that neither of us is obligated to develop feelings we don't genuinely possess. Zarat's bioluminescence flared with what Marcus interpreted as joy, her harmonic voice carrying notes of genuine happiness. I believe that arrangement has the potential to benefit both of our species, Marcus Chen. Welcome to the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. As she rose to leave, Marcus found himself wondering what Emma would think of her brother's transformation from maintenance worker to interspecies diplomat. The thought of his sister brought a smile to his face because he suspected she would be absolutely fascinated by the scientific implications of everything that had happened to him. For the first time since awakening in the Royal Medical Facility, Marcus Chen felt genuinely optimistic about his future. The life he'd lost might have been simpler, but the life he was gaining promised to be extraordinary beyond imagination. The only question was whether he had the courage to rise to the challenges that lay ahead. 3 months of intensive training had transformed Marcus Chen from a maintenance worker into something that defied easy classification. His enhanced physiology had adapted to the rigorous combat instruction with startling efficiency, allowing him to master Zarathi martial techniques that typically took their species decades to learn. His diplomatic education had progressed with similar speed, his enhanced cognitive abilities allowing him to absorb complex political theory and interspecies psychology at rates that amazed his tutors. But it was the assassination attempt that truly tested what he had become. The attack came during a formal diplomatic reception in the station's grand ballroom, a glittering affair that brought together representatives from across the coalition to celebrate the preliminary peace accords. Marcus stood beside Princess Zarethith in the reception line, wearing formal attire that marked his unique status as both advisor and bond partner. The outfit was a masterpiece of diplomatic fashion, incorporating human design elements with Zarethith materials that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Marcus had learned to read the subtle signs of danger during his months of training. The slight wrongness in the atmospheric processing that suggested someone had tampered with ventilation systems. The barely perceptible shift in crowd dynamics that indicated coordinated movement among seemingly unrelated individuals. The micro-expressions on alien faces that betrayed hostile intent despite diplomatic smiles. Tonight, all of those warning signs were screaming at him simultaneously. "Something's wrong," Marcus murmured to Zariath, his enhanced hearing picking up the subsonic frequency harmonics that Zarathi used for private communication. His language training had progressed to the point where he could speak several alien tongues fluently, though Zarathi remained challenging due to its reliance on harmonic overtones that required specialized vocal modifications. "I sense it as well," Zarath replied in the same frequency range, her bioluminescent patterns remaining steady and diplomatic despite her growing concern. The Andromedan delegation arrived with more security personnel than protocols specify, and several of them are carrying devices that register as weapons on my enhanced senses. Marcus scanned the ballroom with eyes that had been modified to perceive across a much broader spectrum than normal human vision. The Zarathi enhancement allowed him to see heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, and even some forms of exotic energy that normal humans couldn't detect. What he saw made his blood run cold. At least 12 individuals throughout the ballroom were carrying concealed weapons, their energy signatures creating a complex pattern that suggested coordinated positioning for a crossfire attack. More disturbing, several of the weapons showed the characteristic energy patterns of Zarathi military technology, indicating that someone with access to royal armories was supplying the attackers. "We need to evacuate the ballroom," Marcus said, his training taking over as he began calculating angles of fire and potential escape routes. "This isn't just an assassination attempt. They're planning to kill everyone here and make it look like an accident." Zarath's patterns flickered with alarm as she processed the implications. A massacre at a diplomatic reception would devastate the peace process and potentially trigger the very war the negotiations were designed to prevent. The death of representatives from dozens of worlds would create a diplomatic catastrophe that could shatter the coalition. "The emergency protocols require—" Zarath began, but Marcus cut her off as his enhanced hearing detected the subtle whine of charging weapons. "No time for protocols," Marcus said, his human instincts overriding diplomatic training as he grabbed Zaras's arm and began moving toward the nearest exit. They're about to open fire. The first shots erupted from 3 different directions simultaneously, plasma bolts designed to look like a technical malfunction in the ballroom's lighting systems. But Marcus's enhanced reflexes and tactical training allowed him to track the true source of the energy beams, and what he saw confirmed his worst fears. The attackers weren't just trying to kill Zara. They were systematically targeting the most influential peace advocates from every major species represented at the reception. the Andromedan ambassador who had championed diplomatic solutions, the vegan trade minister who had brokered economic incentives for peace, the human delegation leader who had convinced Earth's government to support the Accords. It was genocide disguised as terrorism, an attempt to decapitate the entire pro-peace movement in a single coordinated strike. Marcus's training kicked in with crystalline clarity. His enhanced physiology allowed him to move faster than any unmodified human, while his combat instruction provided tactical awareness that let him navigate the chaos with deadly efficiency. But most importantly, his months of working with Zarowith had created an almost telepathic understanding between them that transcended the barriers between their species. "Shield wall formation," Marcus called out in harmonic Sarathi, knowing that Zarowith would understand his tactical intent even as he launched himself toward the nearest group of attackers. Marcus had discovered during training that his human unpredictability, combined with enhanced Exarathi abilities, created a fighting style that no opponent could prepare for effectively. He moved like liquid lightning, striking with precision that disabled rather than killed while advancing inexorably toward the weapons that threatened innocent lives. The first attacker never saw him coming. Marcus's enhanced speed allowed him to cross 30 meters of crowded ballroom in less than 2 seconds, his modified skeletal structure absorbing the impact as he slammed into the assassin with enough force to shatter crystalline armor. The stolen Zarathi weapon flew from nerveless fingers, its energy cell cracking against the ballroom's ornate floor. But 11 more attackers remained, and they were adapting to his presence with the tactical flexibility of professional killers. Plasma fire erupted from multiple directions as the remaining assassins abandoned subtlety in favor of overwhelming firepower. Marcus found himself diving and rolling through a deadly crossfire, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to stay ahead of energy beams that would have vaporized him instantly. Zaratith wasn't idle during his assault. Her own combat training combined with the natural advantages of Zarathi physiology made her a formidable opponent in her own right. Her crystalline form could deflect certain types of energy weapons, and her harmonic voice could generate frequencies that disrupted electronic targeting systems. More importantly, her royal biosignature could override the safety protocols on stolen Zarathi weapons, turning the attacker's stolen arsenal against them. "Marcus, incoming from your 6, Zarath called out, her voice cutting through the chaos with harmonic clarity that reached him despite the cacophony of screaming diplomats and discharging weapons. Marcus spun and dove, feeling the heat of a plasma bolt sear the air where his head had been moments before. His enhanced senses tracked the shot back to its source, a figure in Andromedan military dress who was already lining up for a second shot that would definitely find its mark. But Marcus's human unpredictability had one more surprise in store. Instead of dodging again, Marcus charged directly at the shooter, his enhanced musculature allowing him to leap clear across 2 banquet tables in a single bound. The assassin's second shot went wide as Marcus slammed into them with the force of a guided missile, both of them crashing through an elaborate ice sculpture and into the ornate wall beyond. The impact would have killed a normal human, but Marcus's modified skeletal structure and enhanced healing factor absorbed the damage while his opponent crumpled unconscious to the ballroom floor. 9 attackers remained, but the tactical situation had shifted dramatically. Marcus's assault had disrupted their coordinated positioning, forcing them to reveal themselves to the ballroom's security systems. Automated defenses began targeting the revealed threats while station security forces converged on the ballroom from multiple directions. More importantly, the other diplomats in the room had finally overcome their initial shock and begun coordinating their own defensive efforts. The vegan delegation had taken cover behind overturned tables while their security detail returned fire. The human representatives were evacuating civilian personnel through emergency exits. Even some of the more militaristic species had begun engaging the attackers directly. But the greatest surprise came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Telvar, the lead Andromedan negotiator who Marcus had assumed was part of the conspiracy, suddenly stepped into the line of fire to shield a group of evacuating civilian staff. The elderly diplomat took a plasma bolt meant for others, his sacrifice buying precious seconds for the innocents to reach safety. Not all of them are involved, Marcus realized, his tactical assessment shifting as he reevaluated the situation. This is a false flag operation designed to frame the entire Andromedan delegation. Zareth processed his conclusion with the speed that made her such an effective diplomat. If we can capture some of them alive, we can prove the attacks don't represent official Andromedan policy. The remaining attackers seemed to realize that their mission was failing because their tactics shifted from assassination to escape. Smoke grenades exploded throughout the ballroom, filling the ornate space with choking clouds that obscured vision and disrupted targeting systems. Marcus's enhanced senses gave him a significant advantage in the artificial fog, allowing him to track enemies by heat signature and electromagnetic emissions even when optical targeting failed. But the attackers weren't trying to continue their assault. They were trying to reach extraction points. "They're running for the docking bays," Marcus called out, his enhanced hearing tracking the sound of running feet through the station's corridors. "If they reach their ships, they'll escape and leave the Andromedan delegation to take the blame." Marcus didn't wait for orders or authorization. His months of training with Zara had taught him that sometimes the right action required initiative rather than consultation. He sprinted from the ballroom in pursuit of the fleeing attackers, his enhanced speed allowing him to close the distance even as they tried to lose him in the station's maze of corridors. The chase through the diplomatic station showcased everything Marcus had learned during his transformation. His enhanced endurance allowed him to maintain sprint speeds that would have exhausted a normal human within minutes. His improved cognitive abilities let him anticipate the attacker's route through corridors he'd learned during his maintenance work. Most importantly, his human stubbornness refused to let him give up when the stakes were this high. Marcus caught up with the rear guard just as they reached the docking bay levels. 3 attackers had stayed behind to delay pursuit while their colleagues reached the extraction ships, and they greeted Marcus's arrival with concentrated plasma fire that would have reduced a normal human to component atoms. But Marcus was no longer normal by any definition. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge the initial volley while closing distance at speeds that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. His modified skeletal structure absorbed the impact as he slammed into the first attacker with enough force to crack the station's reinforced flooring. The second attacker managed to get a shot off at point-blank range, but Marcus's enhanced healing factor was already working to repair the damage even as he disabled his opponent with precisely targeted strikes to nervous system junction points that his medical training had taught him to find. The third attacker was the most dangerous, a professional killer whose own enhancements allowed them to match Marcus's speed and strength. Their battle ranged across the docking bay in a display of superhuman combat that would have been impossible between normal members of either species. But Marcus had one advantage that no amount of enhancement could replicate. He was fighting to protect innocent lives rather than to complete a mission. That motivation gave him the extra fraction of speed and strength he needed to overcome his opponent's technical superiority. The fight ended when Marcus managed to grab the attacker's weapon and use their own enhanced strength against them, slamming them into the docking bay's reinforced bulkhead with enough force to crack both the wall and several of the assassin's bones. Marcus stood in the damaged docking bay, breathing hard but victorious, as station security forces finally arrived to secure the scene. The extraction ships were gone, but 3 attackers were in custody, along with enough physical evidence to prove that the assault had been carried out by extremist factions rather than official government representatives. Princess Zariath arrived moments later, her crystalline form showing the stress patterns that indicated she'd been genuinely worried about his safety during the chase. "The peace negotiations?" Marcus asked, his first concern being for the diplomatic process they'd both worked so hard to protect. "Saved," Zarath replied, her harmonic voice carrying notes of relief and pride. "Ambassador Telvar's sacrifice proved that the mainstream Andromedan delegation had nothing to do with the attack. The evidence you've secured here will demonstrate that extremist factions were trying to sabotage the peace process by framing legitimate negotiators." Marcus felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him as the adrenaline of combat finally began to fade. His enhanced physiology had allowed him to perform at superhuman levels, but the psychological toll of violence was something no amount of modification could eliminate entirely. How many casualties? Marcus asked, dreading the answer. Surprisingly few, Zara said, her patterns brightening with what Marcus interpreted as relief. Your quick action in disrupting their coordinated attack saved dozens of lives. Ambassador Telvar was the only fatality, and his heroic sacrifice has already become a symbol of Andromedan commitment to the peace process. Marcus slumped against the damaged bulkhead, finally allowing himself to feel the full emotional weight of what had just happened. 3 months ago, he'd been a maintenance worker whose biggest challenge was fixing broken gravity generators. Tonight, he'd single-handedly prevented what could have been the massacre of galactic diplomacy. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what the life bond has made me, Marcus said quietly. What have you become? Zareth asked, settling beside him despite the debris and damage that littered the docking bay. Marcus looked at his hands, still trembling slightly from the aftermath of combat, and saw capabilities that transcended the boundaries between species. I'm not human anymore, but I'm not Zarethi either. I'm something new, something that can exist in both worlds while belonging completely to neither. You are the bridge between our peoples, Zara Thudded said, her harmonic voice carrying deeper emotional overtones than Marcus had ever heard from her before. You are proof that cooperation between our species can create something greater than either of us could achieve alone. Marcus met her alien gaze and saw something there that transcended the barriers between their species. Not just gratitude or political alliance, but genuine affection for the being he had become and the partnership they had forged together. I think I'm starting to understand the romantic attachment aspect of the life bond, Marcus admitted, surprised by his own honesty. Zareth's bioluminescence flared in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated joy mixed with something deeper and more complex. I have been hoping you would reach that realization. The connection between us has grown beyond political necessity into something I value for its own sake. As station security finished securing the scene around them, Marcus realized that his transformation was complete. He was no longer the maintenance worker who had stumbled into galactic politics by accident. He was Marcus Chen, advisor to Zurathi royalty, bridge between species, and quite possibly the being who would help forge the peace that could define the future of galactic civilization. The only question was whether he was ready for the even greater challenges that lay ahead. 6 months after the ballroom massacre, Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the Zarathi flagship Eternal Harmony, watching the most significant diplomatic gathering in galactic history unfold in the space around them. Hundreds of ships from dozens of worlds had assembled for the formal signing of the Andromedan Accords, the comprehensive peace treaty that would end centuries of territorial disputes and establish new frameworks for interspecies cooperation. The transformation in his own life during those months had been as dramatic as the political changes sweeping through coalition space. His relationship with Princess Zarath had evolved from partnership to something deeper and more complex, a bond that transcended the biological dependency that had originally bound them together. They work together now as equals, their combined insights into human and Zarathi psychology creating diplomatic solutions that neither species could have achieved alone. But it was the broader transformation in galactic society that filled Marcus with the greatest sense of accomplishment. The successful prevention of the ballroom massacre had done more than save lives. It had demonstrated that cooperation between different species could overcome even the most determined attempts at sabotage. The signing ceremony begins in 1 hour, Zaratha said, approaching from behind with the fluid grace that Marcus had grown to love. Her crystalline form showed the warm, bioluminescent patterns that she displayed only in his presence, a private language of affection that had developed between them over the months of their partnership. Are you nervous? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from the subtle harmonics in her voice. Terrified, Zarath admitted, settling beside him at the observation window. This treaty represents everything we've worked toward, but it also creates expectations that may prove impossible to fulfill. What if the peace doesn't hold? What if we've built something beautiful but ultimately fragile? Marcus reached out and took her hand, his enhanced nervous system registering the complex electromagnetic fields that surrounded her crystalline form. The contact sent pleasant, tingling sensations through both of their modified physiologies, a side effect of their biological bond, that had become one of his favorite aspects of their relationship. "Then we'll fix it," Marcus said simply. "That's what we do. We find the broken things and make them work again." Zaradith's patterns shifted into configurations that Marcus recognized as amusement mixed with affection. "You still think like a maintenance worker sometimes." "Some problems are just maintenance issues on a galactic scale," Marcus replied. "The important thing is having the right tools and knowing where to look for the root cause of the malfunction." A soft chime announced an incoming communication, and Queen Veltareth's image appeared in the observation deck's holographic display. The Zarati ruler looked every inch the galactic monarch, her robes incorporating materials from dozens of worlds as a symbol of coalition unity. "Marcus, Princess Zariath," the Queen said, her harmonic voice carrying across space with crystal clarity. "The Andromedan delegation has arrived, and their new ambassador wishes to speak with you both before the ceremony begins." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of the Andromedans. Ambassador Telvar's sacrifice during the ballroom massacre had helped save the peace process, but it had also left his people without experienced diplomatic leadership at the most crucial moment in their history. "We'll be there shortly, Mother," Zariath replied, her formal tone indicating that this was official business rather than family conversation. As the Queen's image faded, Marcus found himself studying his reflection in the observation window's transparent surface. The face that looked back at him bore little resemblance to the maintenance worker who had stumbled into galactic politics 6 months earlier. His features had subtly changed during the enhancement process, taking on some of the symmetrical perfection that marked Zaraphi aesthetics while retaining their fundamentally human character. But it was his eyes that showed the greatest transformation. They held depths of experience and understanding that no normal human could possess, the accumulated wisdom of someone who had become a bridge between vastly different forms of consciousness. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Zareth asked, apparently reading something in his expression that indicated his contemplative mood. Marcus considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked about his feelings regarding the path that had brought them together. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," he admitted. "There was something peaceful about fixing gravity generators and sending credits home to Emma. But I wouldn't trade what we've built together for any amount of simplicity. Even though the life bond means you can never return to fully human existence?" Zara pressed, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of concern that spoke to deeper fears about the constraints their relationship imposed on his freedom. "Especially because of that," Marcus said, turning from the window to meet her alien gaze directly. "The bond didn't take away my humanity, Zarateth. It gave me the chance to become something more than human while still retaining everything that makes me who I am." Her bioluminescent patterns flared with the deep, complex configurations that Marcus had learned indicated profound emotional satisfaction. Over the months of their partnership, he'd become fluent in the subtle language of Zarathi emotional expression, just as she'd learned to read. He took the strike intended for the princess. Now the Queen won't release him. HFY Stories.